Because we are an unlikely pair.
I always thought we should have a podcast called, like, To Make a Long Story Short.
Damn it!
Right.
You're just talking about podcasts.
Wouldn't that be a great title?
Yes.
Or The Long and the Short of It.
People tell their stories and then we just make the abridged version.
Exactly.
I'm gonna make this short. All right, well,
So,
how do we meet?
as I recall,
Okay.
well, we actually in a way met before we met.
That is true. Oh, wow.
And
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't know it was you.
Yeah. This
So
is actually a really great story.
This is just otherworldly in a way.
Yeah.
So I was driving to Joshua Tree to finish this book, and a doctor called me who used to be a member of my congregation, and he said, "Steve, I need your help." I said, "What do you need?" He said, "There's a young guy and a young woman, young couple, and he's very ill. He has COVID. We're trying everything, but it's a very, very dire situation. And he has this wonderful young wife and a little baby, and they won't let her see him. And I can't get Cedars to budge. I think it was they let you see Nick maybe in an hour or something, or
Right before his leg was amputated. I was
Yeah.
allowed in the hospital because I had to sign papers in case he would die.
But they made it very difficult for Amanda to spend the time she wanted and had every right to spend with Nick. And so this doctor called me and he said, "Can you make this happen?" And I had no idea who you were. I had no idea who Nick was. It was just a young couple in trouble. And so I made a few phone calls and got it worked out. And I didn't know it was a man. And then sometime later, I don't remember when, we met and I put it together. And I realized this was the young wife and young mother who wasn't allowed, and that I kind of worked it out with Cedar to help them understand why this would be the right thing to do. And I never told Amanda about it until we were at an event. I think it was when For You and I'm Gone came out. It was at the new building in the
Yeah.
temple, and the doctor showed up.
Yeah.
John showed up.
So we had to come clean.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's when I decided to tell Amanda that, we met before we met. And I've always thought that was a kind of tragic and beautiful.
Yeah.
moment,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, obviously we're meant to meet.
Yeah. So that's sort of how we met before we met. And then was it when I was on The Talk?
You were on The Talk, yeah. So I'm on a talk show called The Talk on CBS, and we were still doing everything over Zoom because it was still very much in the COVID times. And Steve was on the show for The Beauty of What Remains. And I remember, we get reading material before so that we can read as much as we can before we interview anybody. And I had been given every grief book, in the world, sometimes 2-3 copies over. And I couldn't bring myself to read any of them because I was like, I'm going through this. The last thing I want to do is read more about it at night. Like I'm trying to heal. I'm trying to escape this, and I don't want to turn the page, you should be feeling this right now. I am feeling this right now. So I couldn't read any of them, but we were having Steve on the show. And so I remember picking it up and starting to read it. And it was the one and only grief book that I could read and get through because it was so honest and brave and just to the point and really hit such a home run with me and where I was at. And so after I think that interview, I maybe slid into your DMs. And then we started dating.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
poor Betsy.
By the way, Betsy's cool.
She understands. Sam.
You go ahead, I'm tired.
It's a new age.
Yeah.
So we gotta be flexible around here, guys.
That was it.
That's how we.
That was how, and then we.
And then we did a wonderful talk at the 90-second live for your book.
That's right. That's
Uh,
right, for this.
Yes.
Yes.
And
then when
Live Your Life came
Live Your
out.
Life came out, we did it, was it the
Another-
Stryker Center or the 92nd?
That's right. Yes, something.
I think it was the Stryker
Yeah.
Center where I got to interview Amanda. She's a very skilled interviewer. I am less so, but because we have this affinity for each other and are kind of dialed into grief and loss in a similar way, that interview was a very special experience.
Yeah.
I think for everybody who was a part of it, because Amanda, we're both from the Midwest, and we're pretty, what you see is what you get. And that was certainly the case in that interview. And I remember having you read that piece about your promise to Nick in the hospital and that kind of, and it's so like painfully beautiful. I'll never forget that, because there aren't that many times when you're doing these kinds of things and it's real. Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis is in the house.
Elvis is in the building.
Hey Elvis, you want to come up and see mom?
This kid loves an introduction.
Yeah, come on, Elvis.
He just made his
Hey,
day.
man.
Can you say hi to Steve?
Hi.
Can you give him a high five?
Oh, my God, you are strong. Let me see the. Wait a minute. Do you have muscles? Do you have muscles? Let me see what you got.
Yeah.
Oh my God!
He eats his vegetables.
Wow!
So nice. Yeah.
Wow!
That's
Do you want to sit up
that's
there
what
with
gives
us?
you muscles in our
You can
house.
sit with your mom.
Hi. Mwah. What's in my lap? Oh, okay. There you go. If
So
you feel the need to sing anything, you can.
Yeah.
Sometimes he bursts out into songs. You just never know.
So it's rare that these kinds of things are real, really real, and it was, and it is, and that's a rare and special thing. So, and we've just stayed in touch and helped each other, and my daughter Hannah has babysat for Elvis a couple of times.
I've gone to synagogue.
Yeah, we're making a Jew out of a man.
Always loved the Jewish religion.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie.
And that's sort of how we met and became friends, and have tried to help each other through life and career.
Well, and I will say that this meeting has come at a great time, because I was telling Steve when he emailed me earlier this week saying, do you want to grab dinner beforehand? I was saying yes, because I very much value the words that you say and the wisdom that you have. And I said to you, I was like, grief has been kicking me in the butt lately. And, you know, it ebbs and flows, of course, it's life. But, you know, he turned 4 on June 10th, and then Father's Day and Nick's third anniversary of his passing is coming up, and I've just been going through it. And so this little meeting and conversation is, thank you for asking me to do it, but it's selfishly, thank you, because I needed
It helps.
your appearance.
It helps. Yeah.
Oh, do you have something to say? Oh,
You know, there's this, I won't tell you the whole story, but the punchline of the story in the Talmud is a phrase from the rabbis, which is, the prisoner cannot free himself. Which is, I've always understood to mean that no one suffers pain better alone. No one. No one. It's actually been studied. They did a study many years ago in the 80s where they took college kids and they put them in a room with a bucket of ice water and asked them to stick their feet in the bucket, and they timed how long they could stand it. Then they took the same kids, same ice bucket, but they allowed each kid to invite someone into the room to be there with them.
Mm.
And every one of those kids could keep their feet in the pail longer. Because they weren't alone, they could endure the pain longer. And it's really only reaching out that diminishes our suffering.
Yeah.
And by the way, here's the cool part, increases our joy,
yeah.
right? It's way more fun to celebrate with other people than alone.
Yeah.
Way more fun.
So much fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how it began.
Well, we are very excited to be here tonight. Neither of us have been here before, so this is a cool store to get to see. I've heard a lot about this place.
Yeah.
Um,
And we admire, I love Zibby, and we admire what she's doing, because she's turning the publishing world upside down. Good for her. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Because it is a difficult world. But Steve, tell us why you wrote both of your books, but you can start with The
Okay.
Beauty of What Remains
So The
first.
Beauty of What Remains, I wrote as a kind of apology to everyone I had ever spoken to about death and grief and loss. Because I was telling a lot of half-truths. And a half-truth is a whole lie. I thought I was doing a pretty good job helping people, literally 1,000 people through the death of a loved one. And I thought I was doing a pretty good job, and they felt I was doing a pretty good job. And then my dad died. And I realized that almost everything I had been saying to people to be helpful was a half-truth. And so the book is really, in a sense, an apology for that and an attempt to set the record straight about grief, about memory, about age, about regret, about so many things that, I just wasn't exactly right in what I was saying because I hadn't lived it. And when Steve Leader, the Rabbi, became Steve Leader, the son, boy, it was a different world. And so that's really why I wrote it, because I had to write it.
And I have to say, my favorite parts, there's many favorite parts in this book, but some of them are when you are just Steve Leader, the son. Because I think, and we talked about this at dinner, we put clergy on such a high level, this unattainable level. And so to hear you speak and write it, there's something very brave in writing down something very honest and then printing it and then giving it to the world to see.
Yes.
And so I remember this night so vividly. I was laying in my bed reading this book, and you were talking about like the first time you had to be just Steve Leader, not the rabbi, and you were being so honest, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And that's when I was like, I know I like this man. I believe in now what he's writing down in this book.
Yeah. And I think that I know you well enough to know that I think being a celebrity, being a public person, being recognized, you have the same issue in a sense. It's like there's this perception, and then there's the reality of your life.
Right.
And people don't necessarily want to know about the reality part.
Yeah.
But without it, you're not a whole person. You're a half-truth.
Right.
And I was just a half-truth. So that's why I wrote it. And it was cathartic, a lot of other things, but I never expected it, by the way, to come out in the middle of COVID. I started it way before anybody knew what COVID was, but it happened to land in the middle of COVID, which in a way was helpful because people wanted to talk about vulnerability and fear of death. And we all were afraid of dying. Everyone, it pierced everyone's denial of death. I mean, I remember walking down this street in my neighborhood to get outside and get some exercise, and if someone was on the same side of the street, one of us crossed over to the other side of the street. Remember?
Yes.
Wearing shields and
gloves and
we were scared.
Yeah.
People were walking around in hazmat suits. We were wiping down packages. We were scared, all of us. And so this landed in that ethos.
Yeah.
And I'm glad it did. I will say it came out January 5th of 2020. And we had a whole media launch planned, and then something happened on January 6th, 2020, that kind of wiped out the whole plan for the launch. But I don't care because it's found its own place. But yeah, I think that too made people feel very vulnerable, feeling like life was coming apart. So anyway, that's why I wrote it. Can we talk about your book?
Yes.
Good, because I want to talk about your book. Amanda, she's written 2 very powerful, beautiful books. I want to know which of the 2 was more difficult to write. Live Your Life, or Tell Me Your Dreams, which is a children's book, written in part for Elvis. But I think people often assume writing a children's book is easy.
Yes, I think that is an assumption that is not true. I would say that the more difficult book was definitely Live Your Life. I started writing it 2 weeks after Nick passed. And
why?
Because the publisher gave me a day.
But why did you?
She said,
let me back up.
You have 6 months to write this book.
Why did you choose to write a book at all? Forget why you started it then. Why would a person who went through hell and was going through hell write about it?
Yes. Well, I am a glutton for punishment, which is also what we talked about. I had never considered myself to be a writer. I never thought I would write a book. It wasn't in any kind of even like dream landscape of careers that I would have. And I have many ideas of what I still would love to do. But they called me up, HarperCollins called me up, and they presented me with this idea. My little sister, Anna, who helped me write the book, is an incredible writer. And it was her dream always to be an author. And she was living with me at the time. So I said to them, I will do this if Anna writes it with me, because she is a writer. She's always wanted to be an author, and she's incredible at it. And she's been living this nightmare with me.
And you trust her.
And I trust her, yes. And I will say there was something so wild about everything that happened to us at that time. Like nothing made sense. And there were so many beautiful things in it and so many crazy, awful things in it. As we were living it, we felt like we were living like there were many times where we were like, we feel like we're in a movie.
It was
like
surreal.
It was so, even why 41 years old, perfectly healthy, no pre-existing health conditions, why this man even got this horrible virus. Nothing made sense. So there was something very like, it needs to be written down retrospectively, and I love retrospective thinking now. Thank God this woman called and offered me this book.
Why do you say that?
Because if I tried to write this book now, I wouldn't remember.
Yeah, I get that.
90% of it. My mind at that time, if you told me what happened on June 4th at 4 p.m., I could say, Nick was in the hospital. I arrived at 3:10. They gave him this medication into this, They was on this medication. They were trying this, my brain was like, I felt like I could work at Cedars-Sinai Hospital.
Well, you were at war.
Yeah, I was
at war.
Yeah. I literally was like, they're gonna want to hire me as a researcher. This is over.
You were at war.
So I am so grateful to it for not only myself, but especially for this little guy. One day he'll be able, to read it and then ask me questions. But
I personally think it's an historically significant book because, to my knowledge, it was the first COVID memoir. I don't know of another one. I'm not a big reader, honestly. I'm not. No, it's true. I'm not.
I'm not either.
Yeah, I think you either write them or you read them. You can't go, right?
Don't tell anybody, guys. This stays in this nice little bookstore.
Right. But I don't know of another COVID memoir.
I never thought of that, Steve.
But it's historically significant. It's emotionally significant, and it's a memoir. But here's my question for you, because because we're dealing in this world of
Yeah.
grief and loss and the way in which it all ebbs and flows. Do you consider it a blessing or a negative that you couldn't write the book today because you can't remember it all the way you did that?
I could write the book today. It just would be I think it would be a different book.
How would it be different?
Well, because I feel like it would be, it's funny because a memoir is about looking back, you know what I mean? But it was so current. We were writing it so current 2 weeks after into the next 6 months that it's more of like a real life in time memoir.
Yeah.
If I wrote it now, it would sort of truly be a memoir, like looking back, going back in.
See, I couldn't write The Beauty of What Remains today because I can't access the same depth of pain.
Well, I told you I like to feel pain, so I could access it.
You are.
Yeah.
Are you anxious and
my
neurotic
God.
too?
I mean, maybe I am. Maybe
I can't, and we were talking, not only can I not access it, at dinner, I mentioned to Amanda that I have a recording of my dad's funeral, which was in September of 2018. And I gave the eulogy and I can't watch it. I haven't watched it once, not once. And I don't want to.
Do you know what's so funny is I didn't tell you this at dinner, but we did a very, very small memorial for Nick, like a week or so after he passed away in my friend's garden. And my friend videoed it and took all these beautiful photos of it. And I've never seen any of them. And it was literally last week that I reached out to him and I said, Trevor, can we please meet up? And I'd love to finally look at all of this stuff because I've been having a hard time with grief. But this is what I'm telling you. I like to inflict the pain on myself.
Well, you want to feel it.
I want to feel it.
You don't want to be dead to it.
It's so strange.
You don't want to be numb to it.
Yeah.
And I want to feel it, but not like this again.
Yeah.
Not like that. I actually had a funeral at noon today. And when I arrived, the family was still viewing this woman's body. And normally, I stand right next to the family and I'm right there with them and help them. I've seen an extraordinary number of bodies, dead bodies. And I flashed back to see my dad's body in the casket for the first time and what that did to me. What an awakening that was for me. Despite having stood with families about literally, no hyperbole, 1,000 times before, standing next to them, looking at their loved one in the casket, it didn't affect me very much, honestly, because wasn't my loved one and I was there to help. But honestly, I could have eaten a sandwich. I was fine.
Yeah.
Then when I wasn't the rabbi and I was the son and it was time to go in and see my dad's body, it was shocking.
Yeah.
Shocking to me. It was a completely different experience. And so today, I was with the family and I looked at this woman's body and I flashed back. How could I not? And it's not a place I really want to go very often.
Yeah.
But when your job involves a lot of death,
Yeah.
it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard, and I'm better at it. But yeah, it would be a different book for you and a different book for me.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's good.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think books, as my little sister just published her first book, aside from Live Your Life, and it took a very long time. Her original pub date got pushed back. It was like this, just struggle finally happened. And we both agree that books, and I think it's kind of what you're saying, you have a timeline for them. I mean, this is life. But they arrive at their own timeline.
So true.
And they are published when they're meant to be published, or they become a success when they're supposed to become a success.
That's right.
And it's I think that beauty of, being able to look back and be like,
And it's also why ideally we shouldn't force a book
right,
out of ourselves
right, yes.
when we don't have one
Yeah, or force a pub date or.
in
force-
ourselves.
Yeah.
Like my editor of Penguin Random House said to me, "We're waiting for another book proposal from you," and I said, "Well, I don't have another book in me. I just don't have anything to say right now." And she wrote back. She said, "I'm not going anywhere.
That's a good answer.
I'll wait."
Yeah.
But I think you're
Yeah.
right. They're in and of a moment, like music.
Talk about For You When I'm Gone.
So For You When I Am Gone,
So good.
I wrote it because of 50 words in The Beauty of What Remains. So I put some things in The Beauty of What Remains that I thought would help a handful of people. Like the piece about you're not gonna be riddled with guilt and shame when the mother you haven't spoken to in 10 years dies. You're gonna be relieved. Like I put certain things in there that I felt would be helpful to a small handful of people that turned out to be a fairly common and widespread conundrum for people. And one of the things I put in was a couple of paragraphs about the concept of an ethical will. Raise your hand if you have a estate plan and a will. Like, okay, all right, millennials, you'll get there. Most people by a certain age, they have an estate plan and a will. And if you think about it, the final word, the last thing most people hear from their loved one who has died, the final words is a legalese boilerplate document written by someone who barely knew them, and it is completely about who gets what and when and how much. That's the final word. The kids get together and that's what they hear. That's what mom or dad, or that's what they have to share. The fountain pen collection and some crap in the basement. And that's really sad. So I wrote a little bit about this concept that has been around since the 11th century among Jews of an ethical will. In other words, bequeathing to your children the non-material riches of your life, your values, your hopes, your challenges, your blessings for them. And the interest in that, like that's what the talk show host wanted to talk about. Tell us more about this in 50 freaking words in a 50,000 word book. And that's what they wanted to talk about. So I thought, oh, well, that's next.
Yeah.
And it's a book that's meant to help us tell our stories. And we're telling our real stories for two reasons. One of them is for our loved ones when we're gone. But if you really are able to tell your story, your truth, your regrets, your understanding of what it means to be a good person, of what is love, of what have you failed at, what do you wish for the people you love when you're gone. If you can articulate that, you're not only leaving the most important bequest and legacy for your loved ones, but you're also creating what I like to think of as an MRI of your inner life, your truth. You ask people what they want on their headstone. I was at the cemetery today. This is never lost on me. I walk around cemeteries a lot. And I do a lot of what rabbis call intake meetings. This is when you sit with a family and talk about their loved one and try and get your arms around their story. And not the facts of their life, the truth of their lives. I used to teach in the seminary, and when we would get to the eulogy part, I would say, the first thing I'd write on the board was, an obituary is the facts. A eulogy is the truths. They're not the same thing. The fact that I was born in St. Louis Park, Minnesota on June 3rd, 1960, those are facts. But you don't know anything about me other than my age. It's not my truth. So if you ask the right questions, you get to the truth of the matter. And then you have this document of your inner truth, and you get to hold it up to the light and say, okay, this is what I say I believe in. Am I living it? Or is my life mostly pretend? Kabuki. And because a pretend life is a horrible way to live. The unhappiest people I've ever known in my life are people whose professed values and lived values are not the same. That's a horrible way to live. That's a double life. It's horrible. We all live it to some degree. I mean, we're all acting to some degree. We have to. People need us to. But the less of that, the better. The more aligned we are, the more we are living what we say we believe, the more peace we have. And so I walk through the cemetery, and everyone's life is unique. That's why you can do 1,000 funerals and not be bored, because everybody's life is amazing. Everybody's life is fascinating, if you ask the right questions. So we're all unique. But if you walk around and look at the headstones, they almost all say exactly the same thing. Loving wife, mother, grandmother, sister, friend. Not your gene size, not your where your kid went to college or their GPA or your net worth, right? Your net worth or your address, your zip code. None of that. And so
imagine if you did. Imagine
Yeah,
if it was like size 27.
Yeah. Except mine would say 26 through 34.
Favorite color blue.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That'd be hilarious.
By the way, there are some outliers. This is not universally true. I have a couple favorite headstones in LA that are outliers. One of them is Rodney Dangerfield. So he's buried in Westwood in that little cemetery behind the APCO Theater, the most expensive real estate in LA.
Oh, wow.
Seriously.
Wow.
It's where Marilyn Monroe's buried, and Joe DiMaggio brought the rose. So Rodney Dangerfield's buried in this long line of major celebrities, and his headstone says, "There goes the neighborhood." And then Mel Blanc, who did all the voices for the cartoons, his headstone says, "That's all, folks." So there are some outliers, but generally speaking, it comes down to the tiny handful of relationships with the tiny handful of people who really matter. And no one in this room has more than a handful. None of us. Now, if you ask someone, what do you want on your headstone? And they answer you truthfully, then you get to reverse engineer your life. Oh, I say loving brother, and I haven't called my sister in a year and a half. Really? You get to realign.
Yeah.
Or at least call bullshit on yourself.
Yeah, right.
One or the other.
Right.
So this book is meant to really do two things at the same time, and I think it does. And then we're going to get to your book, Amanda, because I want to talk about it. It's so important. But I'm going to share with you an email that I got earlier today. This is from the daughter-in-law of a woman who was just diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She was my assistant for years. Just a beautiful soul. This woman was widowed in her 30s with 3 small children in South Africa. Picked up, moved here, and started working as my assistant. And she was my assistant for about 10 or 12 years. Her daughter-in-law wrote to me, and she said, "Steve, so you know, Ruth has your book," and she's talking about For You When I'm Gone. "Ruth has your book, and it is giving her much comfort, solace, purpose, and what to do while she still can. For You When I Am Gone is precisely the space she is holding right now. The space that is telling her to use the good china, to speak the truth, to find her truth, to make her last decisions so that her unique light and positivity shines through. I love that the South Africans say shame. It is such a stupid, perfect, incomplete word And right now, as we take one day at a time, Ruth's 6th great-grandchild was born today in Israel. I pray they go the Sephardic route and name her Ruth to fight off the evil eye and divert the path that seems has been set before us. So this happens a lot, where people just say, I'm so glad for this way of telling the story. And can I share something that you and I talked about on the talk offset?
Oh, sure.
So, and then we're going to go to this. Amanda, when this one came out, the talk was very gracious and had me on again. And we were talking about this, and then we went to a break or something, or the segment was over, and Amanda leaned over to me. She said, you know, I wish I had this for Mick, for Elvis. He's going to want to know, how would his dad responded to these 12 questions? So I said to Amanda, well, you and Nick's family, ask them, what do you think Nick would say? How would he answer this question? And I think you did it, right? You like around Thanksgiving or something,
Yeah.
Everybody got a question and was assigned. And
Yeah.
and now Elvis will have as close to Nick's answers as possible.
Absolutely.
And that's as meaningful as the guitar.
Yeah.
Right?
No, it was such a lovely idea that I hadn't thought of. Because you go into self-pity mode. We're like, well, I don't have this, and then you flip that on its head, and you say, yeah, you can have it. It's a different way about it, but it's the same. Yeah. It's lovely.
So that's that. It's the most important thing you can leave behind, I think. Because people thinking that the material is somehow going to express the emotional, that's like giving people you love a picture of fruit. It's just not. It's seductive, but it's empty. So anyway, now I want to talk about Tell Me Your Dreams.
Tell me your dreams.
Okay. And I want to talk about it, first of all, as I said earlier, everyone thinks writing children's books is easy because they're short. And tell us about writing a children's book.
Well, I will say I babysat for so many years of my life. There's 5 kids in my family, so I started babysitting when I was, 10. I've read a lot of children's books, and what I realized in writing one is that you're really writing a children's book as much for the child as for the adult, because
Or as much for the adult
as for
as
the
the
child, yeah,
right?
because we're the ones reading them, and if Elvis brings me a book that I don't want to read, what do? We go, oh, what about that one over there though? Don't we love that one? Get that one again. Or, as he does, again. And you're like, for the 20th time, this one again. So the story of this is actually very organic. Children go through many different cycles of their bedtime routine, and this happened to be our routine at the time, where I would sit in his rocking chair and we would say our prayers and sing songs, and he still didn't want to get in his crib, as most kids don't want to. And so I just said, do you want me to tell you your dream that you're going to have tonight? And he said yes. And I said, okay. He was 2 at the time. And so I just started creating this dream. And yes, do you have something to say? Oh, okay. And he loved monster trucks at the time, and he loved trash trucks and the beach. And so I started creating this dream, and I started putting Nick into the dream. So, in my head, I'm like, well, this is a great idea, because this is a way that I can encourage him to go to sleep. And maybe, every night he goes to sleep, he has his dreams with Dada, and he gets to go, and that'll be his time with Dad. And so we started doing it every night. And he started interacting. I would say, there's a huge trash truck that comes in your room. What color is it? And he would go, green. And I go, it's green. And we had this whole story. And then I would put him down in his bed, and I would walk out of the room, and I would just hold my heart, because it was just like this, cute thing. So it's so funny, you have a child, and if there's parents here, I think you can all attest that they inspire you so much, all of a sudden you're singing these songs that you're making up about, this is a bean and the bean goes here. And you're just, and so you just, and you think you're the most creative person. So you're like, that could be a children's book. That could be a children's book. This could be a children's TV show.
True.
You think you're a genius.
Oh, yes.
So the second he was born, I started doing this way before I even wrote Live Your Life. I had like 5 different children's books ideas. Well, then I wrote Live Your Life, and then I was on the phone with my publishers, and I was like, I'd love to show you these children's book ideas. I pitched them my old 5 ideas, and they're like, and I'm like, okay. And then I go, well, Elvis and I are doing this bedtime routine where I tell him his dream, and he's like started interacting with me, and it's our theme. Every night we're doing it. And it gets him to go into his bed, and it's kind of like a great way to send him off to sleep. And he's encouraging, with his dad. And they go, "That's it. That's the book." And I go, I mean, I even have that was the pitch. And they're like, "That's the book." So then we got to writing it. And I'm gonna steal your words again. You know what words I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
We did a podcast, an Instagram Live when the book came out, and Steve said to me, "It's hard because children's books have to be simple, but not simplistic." And I was like, "You're right." And the story flowed out of me because it is what we did every night when I would tell him his dreams. But when then you actually put pen to paper, and I didn't want huge paragraphs on each page because I know what it's like to be a parent reading a children's book to a child. Yes.
You try to skip pages and they bust you.
Yeah.
Daddy, you didn't read the part about the man with the yellow hat.
It's a paraphrasing happening.
Yeah.
You're falling asleep.
So I wanted it to be a great read for adults but also meaningful to children. And then after it was published and I was doing kind of the press tour, I realized, and again, things you realize after you wrote a book, I'm sure this happens to you a lot too in writing. You write it with one idea, and then the beauty that I felt like when it came out was that I think it's really hard being a parent and explaining any kind of death to a child, a friend, a sibling, a parent, a grandparent even. It's really hard to talk to children about those that we have lost. And a lot of parents don't know how to do it. And I'm navigating it myself. But I thought that this was a beautiful way now for parents that are, breaching the subject. Every night, go on a dream with your grandma. You get to dream with your sibling.
By
You
the
get to
way,
dream with your friend.
it works for adults too.
It does.
It really does.
And that's what I love about children's books. You ask me why I love writing children's books, because I actually think it's like an animated movie. It's like, why does Up make you cry in the first 2 minutes? Why does Inside Out make you think about? It's because it's actually for adults too. And we forget that we are children and that we are still children. And sometimes a children's book can hit home as much as a book or a memoir or a novel or anything that we did.
I actually talked about a children's book today in the eulogy.
Oh, really?
Because this woman died suddenly. And I talked about Shel Silverstein's The Missing Piece. And this proclivity that humans have to just see the missing piece and miss the much larger and more beautiful part of the story.
Yeah.
So they're very profound and very deep.
Yeah. Sometimes we just need like a simple couple sentences on each page that hits the mark, Sometimes we need more, but I think that children's books give us an opportunity to explore, lots of things in that life.
We, our daughter, my daughter, and Betsy's daughter.
As I said, we don't have to.
Yeah, we don't. Just to be clear. Yeah, just to be clear.
No, we teased before.
Yeah. She's a preschool teacher. She's got her master's degree in early childhood education, and she's a nursery school teacher. Yesterday was her birthday, so Betsy and I went to the class. We went to her school. We went to the class. We brought, some strawberries, and we sat in, and all of that. And Hannah started then talking to us about her. She's 31 years old, and she started talking about her favorite children's books from when she was a child.
Yeah.
That she's now sharing with these kids. And I'll bet, I don't want to get into my pathetic childhood because my parents did not read books to us. We didn't have children's books in our house because they didn't know anything about parenting, because they were 17 and 18 when they got married and had 5 children before they were 30, and they really just didn't know. However, most people in this room, if you had children's books and parents who read them to you, I'll bet, no matter your age, you can remember them. And you probably can't remember what you had for breakfast 3 days ago, which is an indication of how indelible children's books are in the hearts and minds of adults.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that's the power of it. Right? It's I'll bet you can name your elementary school teachers.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Right?
yeah.
But do you know like what you had for dinner 3 days ago?
I eat the same thing every day. I'm a weird creature of habit that literally eats the same thing.
Can you remember what you wore 5 days ago?
No.
Okay, but you
Yeah.
remember your
You're right.
kindergarten teacher's name.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is winging it.
Okay, so that's why children's books matter.
Yeah.
You don't need any other proof.
Yeah.
Um,
That's true.
so,
Also, I
Anyway.
think too, most of the time when you're reading a children's book, it's at night.
yeah,
The
you're all
workday is
snuggled
over,
in.
you're snuggled in,
Yeah.
and you are allowing yourself time to absorb information. Throughout the day, phone calls are happening, emails are happening, texts are happening, you're working,
Right.
blah blah blah, things
Right.
are going in and out. But at night, you're snuggled into a rocking chair, you're holding the weight of somebody, also
very
is very
intimate.
healing.
Yeah.
And then you sit down and you read. There's a book called I'll Love You Forever.
Oh God, yes. Yeah.
I swear I can't get through this book without crying every
Yeah.
time. I'm like, I'm doing great, and then I'm like, oh. You can't
Right.
get through this book.
Why should you? It's just
Oh, gets you every time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so. I think the power of a great children's book is inestimable. Really, it is,
Thank
and
you.
and this is a great one. And the idea that dreams are also real.
Yeah.
This is something that I have struggled with. Personally, I don't say this to people, but people ask me often. I saw a butterfly on his birthday, and he loved butterflies. Do you think it's a sign? My wife's best friend died of stomach cancer about 25 years ago. No, 21 years ago. And Betsy sees a ladybug every year on her birthday. Crazy. And she said to me, do you think that? To me, these things are real. And then people say to me, oh no, that's just a projection.
Yeah.
To which I say, it's my projection. That's like saying a dream isn't real.
Yeah.
But it is real.
Yeah.
You had it. Sometimes you remember it. It informs your conscious life. It's real.
Yeah.
It's as real. That's like saying love isn't real. It is real. You just can't draw it or touch it or define it.
Oh, I love that.
And I think that's, I'm so glad that it's about a dream in that way, because we tend to dismiss these non-material things as not real. And they're the most real things.
Yeah.
They're the most real things we have.
I've had only 3, but I've had 3 dreams about Nick.
Oh, that's interesting.
The first one didn't even come until a year to date of his passing. And I was getting so mad because so many people I didn't even know were like, people that didn't even know Nick were like, I had a dream of Nick last night. And I was like, how rude. Like, Nick, first of all, Nick,
That's my projection.
why are you going to that person that you didn't even know?
Yeah.
Hello, I'm right here. Come to me. So I've only had 3, but I will say they were so beautiful and so real. And I remembered I still to this day remember every single second of this dream. And so healing and so just beautiful. And I think that's why I, unconsciously even just started, including Nick in on his dreams, because I want him to, I already think he probably does. He just doesn't, can't tell me. But I feel like, he didn't get much time with his dad. 10 months, which is nothing. My 2 really good friends have a little baby, and I spent Sunday with them, and he's 10 months old. And of course, without getting, Debbie Downer at this party. In my head, as soon as they were saying he just turned 10 months, I went to, that was Elvis's age when his dad went into the hospital. He never saw his dad again. And I was just looking at this little child and noticing how little, like 10 months is. Like, it's nothing. It's no time.
Yes.
And it's no time for him, especially, but no time for Nick either. He didn't get to really be a dad.
Right.
And I just was, sitting and wallowing in that, of course, but at the party, like,
Of course,
and then-
right. Yeah, that's the painful
Yeah.
part,
Yeah.
right, of grief.
putting on that
A
face.
mask.
Yeah. But because I have had these amazing dreams of Nick, I know he will too. And so I think, that message of just like, go to sleep and keep yourself open to the idea that these people that we love, that we've lost, we can see in our dreams and we can be with them.
I
your
wouldn't
dad?
even say been able. I have not had a single dream about him yet.
Yeah,
And it's been 5 years.
yeah.
And I don't know if that's because both subconsciously I don't want to because it's too painful,
Yeah.
or I just am a bad dreamer. I don't remember my
Mine
dreams.
have only been when I'm on vacation. I'm
open, yeah.
on vacation. It's like 3 or 4 days into vacation where I have finally allowed myself to relax
Right.
and sleep.
Yeah.
That he comes.
Yeah.
And somebody said to me, maybe he's coming to you all the time. You just you're not remembering it or allowing yourself to. But it's only been when I have been super, super relaxed by a beach.
So I'll just share with you one other thing that I've learned that's quite beautiful from situations where parents have died young. And the surviving spouse discovers years later the DNA of that father or that mother. In other words, there are going to be parts of Elvis that develop
Oh yeah.
that you are going to say, maybe he didn't know Nick very well or Nick didn't know him well, but man, that is 100%
It's already
Nick,
happened.
right?
Yeah.
Right, the drums and the whatever,
Yeah,
the
when
guitar and the
this
music.
kid air guitars, I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I'm walking into the room with your father on
Right.
the guitar.
And so
yeah.
for me, that's part of the
Yeah.
beauty
Right.
that remains. Like
Yeah.
he is in there,
Yes.
literally
Yes.
in there.
Yes.
And it's going to pop out at
Yeah.
the most crazy, beautiful times.
How'd you come up with that title? Because I think
The
that
beauty of what
yeah,
remains.
just because I think it's such an important message to remember when you're grieving. It's hard to find the silver linings and the beauty in death, but
The way
you're so
that I've
right.
come up with every title is I've written a book and then looked for the title in the book.
Interesting.
So I finished the book and I started, reading. You know how many times you read it,
Yeah, yeah.
and there was a line in it about how I didn't have my dad, but I was learning to embrace the beauty of what remains. And then I thought to myself, well, that's my very first book. My very first book. I finished the book. My friend Dahlia called. She said, "Hi, Stevie." She calls me Stevie. "Hi, Stevie. What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm trying to think of a title for this book." And she said, "Well, what's the book about?" I thought about it. I said, "Well, it's about the extraordinary nature of ordinary things." And she said, "Well, that's a good title." And that was it. So I've always found titles that are hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
And that's how, I think if you start out with the title and then try to write the book, the tail wags the dog.
Yeah.
So, I have a great title though for a book I'd like to write,
Oh,
but I can't write the book. Want to hear the title?
that's going against your grain.
I know.
Okay.
Maybe Zibby will bite on this one.
All right.
Okay?
What is
The
it?
book is called How to Have Your Second Child First. Isn't that a great title? So you haven't had a second yet.
No,
But
but I'm one of 5 kids, so I understand.
right, it's like the second is like a piece of cake. Right? How to have your second child first. But of course, you can't write that book because there are certain things you can only understand by living them.
Yeah.
And that's one of them, but it's a hell of a title. So it's an example
It is.
of how a title does not necessarily help with
would it all go in,
creating the book.
would it all go into the psychology of like the second child syndrome through the first?
Yeah,
Like,
but
yeah.
none of it makes any sense unless you live it,
Right.
right? It's like, I remember when I was studying writing in college at Northwestern, one of the assignments we had was we had to write instructions for how to tie a shoe. Try that. That's freaking impossible. It's impossible. And yet it's something everyone can do.
Yeah.
But you cannot write instructions. I mean, maybe some genius technical writer could do it, but try it. Well, first you take one lace in one hand, one in the other, and then you cross them over and put one under the other and over, and then you wrap it up. There's no way. There's no way that's happening.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
certain things you just have to live.
Yeah.
And I think that's also true of grief.
Yes, I agree.
There's
Oh, yeah.
it's the only way.
Yeah, no, I 100% on grief because I think everybody handles grief differently and that road for everyone. Speaking, I have a good friend who, quick little story, just lost his father. And before he lost his father, he lost his mother and for that his brother. So he is an experienced person in grief. And he's an Englishman, so he already doesn't really show any emotion. And he's older and he's tough and his nicknames are Pirate and Cowboy, so like kind of just get the idea, right? And but we've become friends and we have like a nice little friendship. And so I was, DMing him and we were just kind of chatting and, just talking about other stuff. And then I was like, just also, checking in, in a nice lighthearted way. It's so funny, even though I've gone through a horrible loss, I have a really hard time still talking about like to people about what to say when someone's died because I know everybody handles it differently. It's like, it's just hard. So, but I wanted to check in. So I said, how you doing? And he goes, Amanda, I don't know if I must be weird. I don't feel pain when somebody dies. My mom died. I moved on the next day. My dad died, and people are crying and they're sad and they're wallowing in it. And the next day I'm up and doing something already. And I go, okay. I was like, but maybe that's how you deal with it.
I mean, that doesn't give people new personalities.
Yeah, I was like, I was like, maybe that is your process. Your process is I move forward. Somebody else's process is I have to take 5 steps back. And I can't get out of bed for 5 months.
So how do you feel when people say to you, Amanda, you're amazing. You're so cheerful and you're taking this on in such an amazing way and you're so this and you're so that. How does that feel?
I mean, I think it's always very kind of people whenever, when somebody comes up to you and says that, nice
You're
things.
amazing.
It's very, very nice. I mean, I told you this at dinner. Behind closed doors, of course, it is a battle. I mean, it is still a daily battle every single day, especially when you have somebody that you wish your partner could see and witness grow up. You know what I mean? It's
a reminder of the absence.
Yeah, his 4th birthday, I was a mess.
Yeah.
Because I hold a party and every one of his preschool families, the mom and the dad and the kids show up. And I'm the only one that is just the mom, and you're looking around and you're like, God, I wish I could be here, and then you're just hiding through the tears and like, okay, good job, everybody, time for cake. And you're just thinking you're making it happen. But it is a daily battle. And no one gets to see that. Like one of my favorite quotes is, you never know what somebody's walking through, what's in their shoes or whatever. Botching the quote. You know what I'm talking about. You can't judge people because you might be putting them on a pedestal and you don't know what their daily battle is, or you might be judging them and you don't know what their daily battle is. And we're all going through it. And I told you this at dinner, and I truly, truly believe it, because life goes on, healing goes on. You're never healed There is not it's been a year and you're healed.
Yeah, you're never
It's-
cured.
You're never cured. It
Right.
is, I am constantly trying different therapies and things to help myself, because what happened to us 3 years ago is a continual pain. And I will continue to try to help myself in order to be that person, you know, exudes joy and happiness, because I am a happy, joyful person. I want to stay that way. And I desperately try to live my life that way.
What if you could?
Yeah.
When someone says, "Oh man, you're so amazing, and the way you're handling this is so great," and what would you like if you could run a Chiron, right? That says what you'd really like to say to that person, besides thank you. You know, if
Yeah.
your inside was a Chiron on the outside, what would it say?
Oh, Steve, they always do this to me when we have talks. I don't know. I think the Chiron would constantly change. You know, sometimes it's oh my gosh, thank you for noticing. Sometimes it's oh yeah, I wish you could have seen me 2 minutes ago. Sometimes it's I'm barely holding on by a thread. You know, I don't think that I do think you said this when we started. I think you see what you get. I don't really put a veil upon my life. I really don't. But I do choose happiness. I do choose positivity.
Always have.
I always have, yes. And so even through what we went through, you know, I remember I went home to Ohio like a week after Nick passed, and my goal every day was just to do one thing that made me happy, just one. If it lasted 3 minutes, if it lasted 3 hours, if it rolled over into another thing that made me happy, didn't matter. If it was hula hooping in the yard and laughing for 2 minutes, that's what it was. But it was one thing to
Wouldn't be high on my list. But,
I have a weird.
the dessert we had down the street. That
I have a weird. I'm very talented hula hooper. I don't know why. It works, so it makes me happy. But I don't know. I choose happiness. It's just not. It's not easy. It's still to this day not easy all the time. But especially with this little guy, and wishing that his dad was around to see him and be a part of his life.
But he makes you happy.
But he doggone it makes me so happy.
Yeah.
Don't you?
Q&A?
Yeah.
Or no
Only
Q&A?
time for a couple.
We only have time for a couple. By the way, just want to recognize Claire Bidwell-Smith is here. So I want to say a word about Claire, because you should all know who she is. This is the first time we've ever met IRL. Claire has done amazing work in writing and on grief and loss. And she just moved to LA, so Northern California's loss is our gain. She's back in Santa Monica where she belongs. And I just want to appreciate everything that you do, Claire. It's really quite beautiful, and you help a lot of people. So
I feel like it's mutual, Steve. Thank
well,
you so much.
we're all in this together. You
Wow.
know.
Both of you guys,
We are.
everything you say. About it. It's just-
So I guess we can take a couple questions if anyone has them.
Would you consider writing a book about explaining death, like both of you, to children? Like, how do you?
I've thought about it because I do it a lot. I mean, every year I give a talk to the nursery school parents association, the elementary school parent. I do it a lot. So I think we could do it. Maybe we will do it. I don't know. But children's books, honestly, are kind of a tricky thing.
But even not a children's book, like
I mean,
how
for
can
adults.
an adult explain it to a child?
Yeah. Maybe. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there about it already. The Child Mind Institute has a lot of really good stuff. Harold Koplowitz, this guy is just off the charts good with young children. There's a lot out there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Never say never.
Yeah.
That's one of my mottos.
We're gonna do to make the long and the short of this podcast.
Yeah.
See, that would be a good title, but again, like, what's the show?
I
Yes.
feel like there's some juice there.
Maybe.
We gotta brainstorm this
Maybe.
idea.
Okay.
Thank you both very much. It's been a beautiful evening. I was struck by what you said about how you feel like how you helped people through grief before your dad was not authentic, basically. And I think I lost my dad at a young age. He was 55 when he died. I was in my early 20s. And it is, I mean, you don't get it until you've been through it. And so I'm wondering, how has your advice or how you
What's
guide
changed?
people, how has that changed?
I'll do it
Since your
quickly
dad died.
because that is the book, but I'll do it very quickly. The major areas where my thinking was completely readjusted. The first was grief. So I'm 63. My generation was the first to be raised essentially under the tutelage of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who, although the work itself is more nuanced, the title is not. There are 5 stages. That's it. It's linear. And what I learned about grief is that it's entirely nonlinear. In fact, in the book, I say that anyone who thinks the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line knows nothing about grief. The geometry of grief is completely different, much more wave-like and tide-like. And it comes and it goes, and you can have days, months, weeks, years even, of beautiful sunny skies, and your back is turned and a rogue wave can just rise up and just take you down. I see this at weddings where a grandparent of the bride is just weeping because she's not here to see this. And he's been fine. He's remarried. He's fine. So the nonlinear nature of grief is definitely one. Because I'll give you a very real example. When the hardest thing I ever have to do is help parents bury a child. What I used to say to those parents before the service started, I would put my arm around and say, listen, I don't have any great wisdom for you today. This is one of those days where we're just going to put one foot in front of the other until it's over. And I promise you, it won't always hurt so much. That's what I used to say that my dad died. I don't say that anymore. Now what I say is, I promise you, it won't always hurt so often. But when it hurts, it's yesterday. I hear a Hank Williams song, it's a day ender for me. So that's one thing. The second is memory. So clergy are full of bullshit about memory. May his memory be a blessing. You always have her in your memory, right? I mean, it's just, and it's a half truth, because yes, memory is beautiful, but it also is incredibly painful. It's both. In the book, I say it's like being caressed and spat on at the same time. It's both. There's a duality to memory that we don't talk about. We're not honest about it. I want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it at all. I want to think about it. I don't want to think about it at all. There's this dissonance. There's this duality. And at the deepest level, what I have found the most helpful and healing to me is accepting the duality as a duality. In other words, these are irreconcilable differences. You cannot reconcile the bitter and the sweet. Making peace with the fact that you cannot resolve it, for me, has been the resolution. I've learned to make peace with the fact that these two things are irreconcilable.
Like, we'll agree to disagree.
Yeah. And when you make peace with that, to me, that's a kind of spirituality and healing that's honest. So I would say this issue of memory is definitely one. And the other thing that changed for me, this is a little bit dark, but also quite ennobling. So we were talking about seeing bodies, etc. When my father died, I flew back to Minneapolis. He had Alzheimer's for 10 years. I flew back to Minneapolis, and my family, I have a big family, we're all sitting in the room, and the young rabbi comes in, and he's going to take us in to see my dad's body, etc. And I remember thinking when he walked in the room, I know exactly how the rabbi feels right now. I have no idea how I feel. I'm floating in space. And then we walk in. Now, to really understand this, you have to know a little bit about the physicality of my dad. My father and I have looked almost identical at every age of our lives. If you saw a picture of me at 10 and a picture of him at 10, other than the clothing, you could not tell us apart. These bags here, this is my father's luggage. Okay? People say to me sometimes, you know, you're on TV and stuff, you could get that. I said, no, I'm not doing anything. This is my dad. This is my dad. I think some of us who are older here have had this experience of like you get out of the shower and you look in the mirror and you go, Dad. You know what I mean? Like, Mom. It happens, right? So we're almost identical. So the young rabbi comes and he's doing his rabbi thing. And we walk in and I'm in a fog. And I approach my father's body in cancer, which I've done 1,000 times. And I put my hand on his chest because I wanted to touch him, but I didn't want to feel how cold I knew he would be. And I looked at him, and I thought to myself, that's what I'm going to look like when I'm dead, and my son is bending over my casket. I am going to die. I was 58 years old, had officiated more than 1,000 funerals, and it wasn't until that moment that I realized I am going to die. And that realization changed my life for the better. That's a big change for me. Big. So those are 2 or 3 of the things that really caused me to reshape and rethink not only how I help other people, but also my own life. I made the decision to essentially semi-retire much sooner than I would have had I not had that moment. I'm like spending money now like a drunken sailor. I never would have done that before. You know, never. I never would have done that. Never. You know, I still, when I forget to turn the lights off and I'm halfway down the street, I turn around and go back in and turn them off. 'Cause, you know, we don't work for the electric company. Right? You know, I close the door. We're not air conditioning me out of the neighborhood. You know, there's so much of it that's in me, you know, but, right? I'm one of 5 too. And
My
like,
dad's are the same thing.
Yeah, they are.
All the lights.
yeah. So those are very powerful reassessments. And I guess I would close with this. Are any of these reassessments worth my father dying? No. My job is not to allow them to be worthless. You would take it back in a second and give up everything you've learned and know.
Yeah.
It's not worth it. The best we can do is to be sure it isn't worthless. That's the mission. And being cognizant of death, it's the only thing that gives meaning to life. I know how like ridiculously pat and simple that sounds, but I have found it to be so true. A deathless life would be a meaningless life. Right? Nobody likes fake flowers. You know why nobody likes fake flowers? Because they have no death. They have no life. They don't mean anything. And none of this is worth it. This is a horrible club to be in. Amanda is in a club whose membership requirements are painful. But it is not entirely without some beauty that remains and some insights that we just don't get any other possible way. So that's kind of a long answer to, I mean, there are many reassessments, but this idea that a half-truth is a whole lie is a very important idea in life.
Well, I think you told me, if I didn't, you can say you did. But I think
Oh,
you
I
did,
will.
or it's in the book, but death teaches you how to live.
Yes. Yes. I mean, that's Kafka's of the meaning of life is that it ends.
Yeah.
It's really that simple. I mean, living it now is not so simple, but so it's a way that my dad is still teaching me He's still my teacher. And he's still my demon. Right? I mean, we both have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So she has awesome parents. Her parents are right. I sat next to her dad at a dinner, and our house dinner.
Yeah.
And I said, so like, how'd you meet her? And why did you fall in love? He said, well, she was wearing a miniskirt. Maureen, she was wearing a miniskirt. That was it. It was hilarious. Right?
Secretary in the office wearing a miniskirt.
Yeah, I mean, that'll do it. Anyway, what's next? I still remember she was wearing a miniskirt. Like, what was I supposed to do? What's next? Who's the boss here? We're gonna sign some books over there. So, okay, we'll be there. But I want to really thank you.
Thank
Amanda.
you.
I mean, you're as generous a soul as God ever made. So
I love you. I love you.
I love you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Elvis, you want to help sign some
Well,
books?
he loves
Elvis was the
signing books.
co-author. I think he should sign
He
some books.
loves signing books.